Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are in the world. I'm Hugh Mayers, and this is the High Caliber Man podcast. Recently, I was speaking to a dear old friend of mine, and we touched base and was just chopping it up, just going backward and forward regarding the Sean Combs Cassie case. Sharing some insights and some views, perspectives related to some of the evidence that's come up in court. Quite gruesome. It's not a murder trial, not gruesome, but quite some quite graphic information in terms of sexual preferences and sexual practices, and giving context to, or whether those were consensual um, or non-consensual, which makes them criminal if they're part of some sort of racketeering or RICO uh, mob type behavior, or just guy a little bit freaky. Um, yeah. So we're going backward and forward about this information, but outside of that, or I guess from that conversation, it sparked the idea of why do so, quite often younger women date much older men, right? It made me ask that question, or that question came up in our conversation, and I went away and started to reflect on it. And it's something that it has existed from time immemorial in terms of, let's say, dating, right? But I mean, partnering, marrying, coupling up with, right? Um, you know, older men and younger women and older men, right? This dynamic has existed from time immemorial. And throughout societies is quite common. It's not as if it's something that has just happened in the Americas, for example, amongst the um, indigenous nations and tribes, but it didn't happen in Africa, or it happened only in Africa. But when we look in Asia, it's an absence of that phenomena, raw. But Europe's very different. It's like it's when you look throughout history and anthropology, you look throughout those two disciplines, you'll find surplus evidence of it being very common. And I would say that it's just as common today. And there are definite reasons why that hopefully I can touch on it in a moment, well, at least I can postulate, right? But there is definitely, in at least modern times, I would say this this very visceral social disapproval of age gap dating, older men and younger women. There is this very negative, it's very, there's the presumptions and assumptions that it's seen in a very negative light, as if somebody's being automatically being taken advantage of. In the case of P. Diddy and Cassie, I mean, he is 55 years old and she is 38. So when they met, I believe she was in her late teens, as in 19 or something of that nature, or early 20s. Don't quote me on that, but I know that whenever they met, there was a 17-year age gap difference, and she was a young woman, and she's still a young woman, but she was, this was some years ago when they first met. And like I said, there is this assumption and presumption that there is a negative component to why men date younger women or marry or couple up with younger women, and that it's the negative side is that it's seen as like the younger woman is vulnerable, that she is prey, that he has predatory intentions, he has manipulative intentions, and he is basically there to take advantage. So, let's say, for example, when people are in a restaurant or you're in a public space and you see a couple that you can see from body language and interaction that the man is significantly older than the woman, um, people can be quite triggered. But what even triggers people on a deeper level, and oftentimes women in a deeper way, I think some men can be moved by that. But I think there's different dynamics at play. I think that, and this is my my own view, really. This is a point I'm not supporting with science or social science or anything of this nature, but there is a thing called status that we have in society. And if you see a older man, younger woman, and on top of that, she's dressed very sexually provocative, designer clothes, jewelry, whatever the case may be, and it looks as if she's a kept woman, or because again, these are assumptions. She could be, like a young corporate exec doing her own thing and just, just fancies this older guy, right? But there's assumptions that people make, and so I think there's a status element, that a status component, and some men find hierarchy a little bit challenging. This guy is seen as a baller, or he's up there, right? And maybe somebody that's not on that perceived level, it triggers their own insecurity. So that can push their buttons. Um, there's a presumption that the woman is being taken advantage of. So sometimes older women, they may have memory loss from times when they were very younger and were using their agency and utilizing their free will, right? As adults, and they may have had a love interest that was older, or had dated somebody older, or been in a relationship with somebody be significantly older than themselves. But for some reason, when they get older, they seem to look at the younger woman as not mentally crippled, but they forget that once you're an adult, you do have rights of an adult, but you also have responsibilities. And so there is something maybe I'll get back to the Diddy and Cassie case, but there is something about the idea of making somebody seem intellectually pathetic, like retrospectively, as if had you at 20 years old voted or signed up to um, serve your country in the armed forces, or applied to purchase a property, or applied to get legally married. There's all these different things that you would be entitled to do as a adult of, for example, 19 or 20 years old or 21 years old. But for some reason, when it comes to age gap dating or marriage, we tend to look at the younger woman as if, some of us can look at the younger woman as if, did she really have mental capacity? Should have, as if like her parents should have had like power of attorney. Power of attorney, power of attorney is a legal status, and it's for people who are incapable, who are deemed incapable by the law of making their own decisions. So sometimes we make decisions when we're younger that are negative decisions, or they have a negative consequence, but that's part of our life experience. If somebody, male or female, is taken advantage of in a particular way that contravenes the law, with respect to their consent to take part in certain actions, there is a very strong legal framework in place, very robust legal framework in place, thank God, right? To serve justice to um, criminals and bad actors, right? However, we can't retrospectively sort of apply this lack of like I said, this lack of agency. So, two adults, they're in love, or they're in lust, or they're interested in each other for whatever the reasons may be. They may have different agendas, but they both have an agenda, right? And it's something that we find uncomfortable, I think, in Western society. But we, I think what's interesting is, as a therapist, it's sometimes not always, it's not about having the answers, but sometimes it's about the questions. So I kind of invite people to say, what is that on a deeper? There's a surface level that we will articulate in a heated conversation, but sitting in silence for a minute and just sort of checking in with oneself. What is it that triggers that emotion, those strong, visceral feelings? Where's that really coming from? What's that really about? But yeah, using a contrast in that case, just as a case study, as a contrast. I know a few weeks ago, um, Tracy Ellis Ross, always get her name wrong, so I'll make sure I get her name right. Tracy Ellis Ross, the daughter of Diana Ross, actress, um, star, very wealthy woman, educated woman of high status in her society in the United States, had an interview and she recently spoke about her choosing to date younger men, right? Choosing to date younger men. She found men of her own age group. They tended to have emotional damage. Yeah, tended to have, emotional issues, baggage, however she articulated. So I'm paraphrasing, but basically they had issues and it didn't work for her. And so she chose to date younger men. Her own choice, employing her own agency. And while I'm a personal choice is that I look at dating for marriage, not dating for dating's sake, but that's just my personal taste and value system, right? But the point still stands. I was like, in the context of hearing her speak, like it's her life, it's her choice. It's a one-way ticket. We don't get to double back. There's a one-way ticket in this life. So if that's her happiness, I was like, good for you, man. Like, good for you. There was a lot of pushback online. There was some men saying, she doesn't have a family, she hasn't had kids, she's never been married before. All these different things that um some people were using to critique her as a person, which I didn't find relevant. And again, I would have to say, like, you need to take a deep breath and kind of check in with yourself. Where's that come from? What's that about? Lots of women celebrated Tracy Ross. Good for her. Go, girl. So I understood that. I comprehended that. I understood that. And I stood with that. But then, not long after that, Shannon Sharpe, the ex-American pro footballer, TV presenter, podcaster with a phenomenal podcast. Wow, right? Killing them right now. Killing them right now. He was served legal papers from a young lady who he dated a few years ago. He was, I believe, 53 at the time, and she was 19 when they met, and they dated for a few years and had obviously an adult relationship, man on woman story, as we say in the Caribbean, right? So the two of them are dating, and the general feedback, people were incensed, not with a criminal element of it, or allegations, should I say, not just the criminal, not that they weren't outraged, but they were the level of outrage about her age. And this young lady would have been an adult at the time that they met. So it was two consenting adults, arguably, in the relationship, right? Which she chose and utilized her free will. But there's something about, as I said, there's something about these assumptions and presumptions in a negative sense, right? That these young ladies are being taken advantage of. I think Nick Cannon, the comedian and TV presenter Nick Cannon, that used to be married to Myra, uh, I can't remember how to pronounce her name, right? But Carey, right? The singer with the high pitched voice, right? They were married. So he was on a podcast some years ago speaking. I don't know if it was about the Harvey Weinstein issue. Don't quote me on that, but he was given an interview, or in a conversation. I think he was an interviewer actually, but he was having a conversation with somebody, and he was talking about being invited, to a yacht party. Obviously, he's a celebrity. He has millionaire peers. They're not necessarily all people from the world of entertainment directly in front of the camera, but he moves in certain circles because he's from that world. And so he was saying that he was on this boat, and there were middle-aged men. The boat was full of men of the yacht owner's a millionaire, or it's a very rich guy, affluent guy, and he's invited his buddy. So they're peers from his class, his status group, right? And age group. So there's all these middle-aged men in their mid-50s, right? And the boat is also filled with young women in bathing suits and scantily clad clothing and accessories, women in their early 20s. And he was like, why are these men here? He said it rhetorically, why are these men here? These are family men, these are married men. They should be at home with their families or doing some kind of like family activity. Uh, and what do these women want? But at the same time, it was rhetorical questions. The women have something the men want, and the men have something the women want. And while we find that in polite company, or oftentimes um, distasteful or questionable or a little bit uncomfortable to sit with, the reality is women are often heterosexual, heteronormative women are, for the best part, hypergamous. Hypergamy meaning they tend to couple or marry men with um, economically senior, richer men than themselves, or sta in some way status higher on their plateau, on their level, or higher, more senior. And that's if you check the history books and if you check the anthropologist, it will say that that's a really extremely common trait across societies, across times, that women tend to be hypergamous. There is a minority, but that is the majority, the vast majority for the majority of time. Um, and you hear these discussions in the world of social media, these different podcasts, and you look at these different posts on Facebook, on Instagram, etc. And it makes you think when you hear sometimes, you hear some of these podcasters and these young ladies speaking or whatever, and they talk about men wanting to date and go 50-50. And it's clear that they generally, when it comes to things like dating, as in going on a date, going to dinner, going to the theater, doing an event, they generally believe in men being the leaders and providers. But if a man speaks about 50-50, he is shamed, or even sometimes his sexuality is questioned. I don't think they're genuinely questioning the man's sexuality to believe because he doesn't have enough to pay for the whole date or is on a limited budget. It really makes him a homosexual, but it's used as shade or used as an insult to suggest he's not a real man, right? So it's clear that society, we do still believe in gender roles. And it would seem that some would argue that it seems that there are those that believe in gender roles when it benefits their gender. But when it's about a right or an entitlement, yeah, gender roles is cool. And we tradition up in this place. However, when but if the gender role denotes not just rights, but responsibilities, then there are those that will be more open to sort of discuss, a bit archaic or, can we unpack this? What these assumptions and presumptions are about. So yeah, it's the conversation with Diddy, did bring up some kind of like interesting points, but like I said, there are cynicism, um, reasons that people give for why age dating takes place. Why do older men date younger women? Why do younger women date older men? There is something about, um, in a positive way though, in something about older men sometimes being perceived as emotionally more mature, um, more charismatic, maybe more confident, more established, um, at a place in life where they may be ready to settle down. Uh, Younger men may, in comparison of the lady's age, may not be at that her dating experience may have led her to believe men in her age range may not be at that place where she is, right? They do say that women mature, girls mature quicker than boys, right? So there is that element as well, which is not a necessarily a negative thing. It's just the young lady exercising her choice. I know that youth is associated with beauty. The evolutionary psychological component to that is that the genes must survive. The stronger chance of that gene surviving and thriving would have been in ancient times much more likely without healthcare and all these things to be with a younger woman than in contrast to an older woman. And so the I think the term I'm looking for is that youth and fertility are, seen more synonymous. So there is that element as well. But there's also the level of, there's an element of status, that younger women are more seen as a prize, in contrast to older women. There are positive reasons, like, in ancient times, men that were more established would take on a wife. There was a tradition of marrying younger women that, because they were more social and economically less fortunate. So they're not doing a favor, but it was a it was a match. It worked. It worked, for both parties. It wasn't against the young woman's will. It was like something that society saw as, it would raise. This woman hasn't got status. This woman hasn't got economic means. There is an older man that does. She marries him, and she automatically it raises her, class. It raises a living standard automatically. And as I say, ancient times, but I still think, if I'm honest, on reflection, thinking about what Nick Cannon spoke about, it does make sense, because if we're uncomfortable with what takes place in this age gap dating between older men and younger women, even, and we're talking about all adults, are we comfortable as a society to say that we want to go back to the drawing board and take it to Parliament or to the House of Lords, or do we need to pass legislation that would make a particular age gap, whatever the number is, even for adults, illegal? Is that what we're really saying? Or we want to literally police people's sexuality and people's desires and preferences in terms of consenting adults? Is that what we're saying? I'm not sure if that's what we're saying, but it's a question, right? It's a question. Should that be debated? Is there going to be a white paper? I don't see any calls for that. I see something visceral that takes place, a kind of a disgust or a triggering, but I don't know if we really mean that. There's that we would want to make that illegal, right? There's other reasons why people talk about the reason why women date older men oftentimes, and it's like there's this kind of idea about a father complex, right? It might be linked to, what people call colloquially, she's got daddy issues. So maybe the young lady grew up in a home where her dad wasn't either physically available, or he was emotionally unavailable, right? Or even in an abusive home. And so she has this kind of Oedipus complex, or this unresolved father issue. And so when by dating an older man, she's trying to repair, some kind of psychological malady. Um, that may in some cases be the case, right? But it does beg the question, why would you be angry at somebody in that situation? What about empathy and compassion? It's interesting how we sometimes, I say we as a society, when we speak about people who we use the term they have issues, do we really mean we feel that, that our thoughts are that they may have certain issues that they need to work through? And if that's the case, why do we use such mean terminology, or are we so mean in our tone? It's almost like weaponizing if the person has issues, as opposed to being compassionate. There isn't like this scene, it isn't seen it from a compassionate lens, but more of a angry lens. And that's the kind of question that keeps coming up for me, is that why does it make people so angry? And like I said, we got a robust legal system in place in the UK. I say the UK, like for example, the law of England and Wales based on French law, the law in Scotland based on Roman law, or the law in Northern Ireland has its own like kind of nuanced legal framework as well. But they got their own bodies that pass statute, and courts that make legal precedent, right? So there's a robust um, legal framework already there. And we have organizations like social services to protect people who are underage. And we also have um, the internet, right? We're living in the era of education, right? Education is accessible. So in terms of people, a free education system as well, free schooling, right? So I think that, to use that word free, existential crisis, people have freedoms, and within a free and democratic society, people are going to make choices that we might not approve of, but we may need to still respect their right to make those choices. And the consequences, good, positive, and negative, lie with them fundamentally, right? But the reason why I was harping on about or going into detail about the legal framework is because there are bad actors, right? There are bad actors. There are people that take advantage. And so, like I said, thank God there is legal framework to address, malevolent beings, right? Who fall foul of the law. But outside of that, you know, um, we need to maybe as individuals, as collectively, it's an interesting conversation for society, but we need to you know, individually as well, sort of sit with that discomfort if it triggers us, like what's that triggering about? Where's that coming from? What's it linked to? Because maybe having that insight may help us to overcome, right? Or look at it from another angle. But from my subjective position, I would say that if I looked at Stacey Ross and the younger men she dates and Shannon Sharpe are the younger women that chooses to date. As he said, he doesn't date his age. He said he date his wage, right? That clip didn't age so well, funny enough but he had said that a few years ago. But I mean, that is a truth, right? It's an uncomfortable truth in society. And there is something, as much as we live in a society that is very graphic, right? And it talks about this just to sell a cake, a little bar of soap or something like that. There's got to be a half naked woman and that. It's like there's programs like um, naked dating. Meet somebody naked and then go off on a date, put your clothes back on and go on a date. And there's all these type of shows that are on the television, films, movies, and music is very graphic. Whether it's Cardi B or whatever the late. I'm not even so up to date, but I know there is these different male and female artists that sing songs and rap lyrics that are quite sexually explicit, right? And it has been for a long time. So that's the kind of society that we live in, modern society. Um, but while that is happening, alongside that, there is still this, I think, this human thing in us to be triggered or quirked out about things of a sexual nature at times. And so, um, ultimately, one could say, yeah, women and younger women are still seen as sex objects by many in the society, right? Whether it's evolutionary psychology, whether it's patriarchy, the bad P word, right? Whatever it is, um, but oftentimes men view women through a sexual lens maybe first, right? And once they're triggered sexually or intrigued sexually or something is stimulated in terms of the woman's physical beauty, then they're more willing to investigate and pursue and find out more of that, in connect with that person, right? Behind the beauty and get to appreciate that person, or sometimes not just see them on a surface level, some men don't go past that stage. It is what it is. Um, so women are often seen as sex objects in our society. However, the coin has two sides, or the traffic goes in both directions, right? And so in our society and from time immemorial, it teaches us the history, and the anthropology teaches us that men are often seen as success objects, right? What did the song say? That what have you done for me lately? The other hit was a nice cultural hits. Those are songs are from America, but they influenced ideology in the Caribbean, ideology in Black Britain, and I say beyond Black diaspora. Like it influenced those songs influenced attitudes. Those are ideological songs, right? They become mantras, right? Don't want no scrub. These are ideological mantras. And so men are often, have been, and will be seen as success objects to a large degree. And going back to what Nick Cannon said, like when he said, why are these men here? Why are these men on the boat? What are they doing on the yacht? They're middle-aged men. These guys are married men with families. What are they doing on a boat with these half-naked girls in their 20s? But then he had to ask the same question, but what are these girls here for? What are they here for, right? It's a millionaire's playground, right? They probably weren't assuming they probably weren't rich women of high social standing or educated women, or it could have been some, but but they were. It sounds like they were women looking for a shortcut. They were not outraged by the idea of being seen as sex objects, but more like, I'm gonna cash out on my pretty privilege. And I didn't make those rules. And I don't have all the answers to resolve the discomfort that this subject sometimes, this subject sparks in people. But I just wanted to put a little bit of food for thought out there. And I look forward to you leaving your comments in the comment section, whether you agree, you disagree. Um, but it definitely was hopefully food for thought. And remember to like, to share, and subscribe. Until next time. Peace.